in my years, when I went to school or when I was out in the community, I dealt with quite a bit of cases where, for reasons that are still enigmatic to me, a lot of black folks out there, for some reason, they began attacking me, and I never figured out why. And then from time to time, they would start bringing political issues like slavery into their rants or other historical terms that I didn't really cross my mind until much later when I looked into what they were fighting about. The irony, of course, is that even though it's true that a lot of black people worked on plantations, Europeans were themselves enslaved in large numbers by Africans, but for some reason we're never allowed to bring this up. And another irony to history is that the first Jew slave owner in the traditional sense was Anthony Johnson, who was himself a black man who had kept a former indentured service under his servitude for life. I said those are things we're never allowed to bring up. That's not to say that I'm trying to score whatever points. I'm just pointing out that for reasons that, for some odd reason, people are still trying to blame me for things that happened hundreds of years ago, and they're acting like somehow I myself benefited from slavery, even though when I compared my economic situation with theirs, I was no better off than they were. But they keep insisting on it. And then, and I think that part of the reason for behind this is because in our school systems, we're only ever taught about the general history of slavery from North American perspective. So it gives people a lot of this impression that only white people were slave owners, but I'm sure that's not true at all. And then Bill Cosby, I guess, some years back, he himself received some criticism when he more or less said the same thing, that one of the best ways for the black community to improve themselves was to stop dwelling on past events and to focus on their educational achievements. Why is that such remarks were not well received even at a time when his reputation was much higher than it is now, is something that I guess other viewers might be able to answer, but for myself I cannot do so at this time. And it was kind of a disappointing factor, so to speak, when I was exposed to all these in my teenage years, because in my earlier youth I had lived in a region where racial segregation was not as evident. I had people from, I had formed friendships with people from different cultural backgrounds, including from Asia and Africa and India, and not once did any racial disputes somehow break out, and for me I treated them the same way. But I said once I moved into a city where people were more racially divisive, then I started to hear a lot of the complaints from their side. And while I took them quite seriously, I looked deeper into the subject and realized that while it doesn't change what happened in regards to slavery in North America, it was also not a universal situation. So by that reasoning, I could just as easily claim that perhaps a lot of people in Africa benefit from European slaves, but that's not the right way to approach this. And I hope that over time this obstacle can be overcome. Question number 25. Given most well-paid work in the USA requires a college degree and universities charge students large fees, Should the system be changed back to tuition-free, much like in the 1970s? No. Actually, as a matter of fact, I would say that one of the reasons why a lot of, or say that the cost for a lot of our employment in the modern era is actually because we are too reliant on degrees. In the past, a lot of employers, they would look at you based on your personal merit. If you show that you had the knowledge or the skills to be able to do a certain job, they would either hire you on the spot or they would do what was called job training. They would pay you a small fee, and then after a certain amount of time, you would be employed full time, and you'd become just an employee with a secure income, so to speak. But then the government in Canada, in the United Kingdom, and the United States and elsewhere, they began to either lower their tuition fees or they even made university free. As I said, this was partially done because they were hoping that more degrees would include more money, but the problem with relying too heavily on degrees, aside from the inflation that came with it, is that it also made employers less willing to look at people based on their individual merits. Not everybody is capable of learning in a university setting. Some people are autodidacts, so they, like myself, prefer to read and write and learn the subject on their own time schedule. That doesn't mean that they somehow know less than people who went to university. It just means that they themselves are somehow better adapted in a different environmental setting. And as I'm certain you understand, that's a far cheaper alternative than the tuition solution, because if the government, the concern was that they wanted to make university students more financially secured later in their lives, they could each just easily spend $10,000 to $40,000 or whatever amount it is that's currently being spent a year, and place that in building apartments and making sure that they themselves never go homeless. I think that would be a far better investment than a university classroom, but I know that a lot of people disagree with that. But that's my opinion. I think that the $40,000 the $40,000 that cost for a bachelor's degree would be far better spent on living expenses. And because while you do not have to have a piece of paper to keep yourself alive, having proper shelter in a climate as cold and as hot as Canada is far more of a necessity. And that also applies according to the United States, by the way, of course. But I'm just speaking on in regards to Canada because I happen to live here, and I know the situation is nowhere near as ideal as a lot of people in the South think it is. We have many similar problems, and I think that the oversaturation of degrees in the marketplace is a problem that the state needs to try to rectify sometime in the near future. The question number 26. Was the decision by the U.S. government to guarantee student loans a factor in major increases charged to students by universities? Was the decision by the U.S. government to guarantee student loans a factor in major increases charged to students by universities? I'm not exactly certain what that question is. I guess maybe what he's trying to say is that it was to guarantee loan forgiveness, something that encouraged a lot of people to go to university when they otherwise may not have done so. That's possible. I'm not saying it isn't. And as I said, I believe that the government has become a little too reliant on using degrees as a means to fix an otherwise broken marketplace. Going back to the previous point, there are in fact a few types of higher educational programs they'll actually am more open to at least getting some subsidies too towards. For example, I could understand that you would not want somebody who has never performed a heart operation without proper supervision to just walk into a hospital room and tend to their first patient. I could definitely see some residency provisions in that regard. But even then, a doctor, they don't need to spend 4 years studying Shakespeare or other literary figures in order to become brain surgeons or heart surgeons. So I believe that medical school should not have mandatory bachelor's degree programs. I believe that if you're good enough to study biology, then you should by all means go to medical school. And if you can prove that you understand the textbook classroom, scientific fields enough that you don't have to repeat the course, you should be able to take the exam, prove yourself, and then go straight to residency. And there, for the next 2 or 3 years, you essentially do a job training program, which is something that other employers and in other employment sectors used to do until fairly recently. And if you can pass that level of training, then by all means you should get your license. But as I said, residency is a very different matter, because in those cases you actually are doing live training of real patients, and they're essentially ensuring that you actually know how to provide the care that would be required of you if the day that you set off to become more independent. That's something that could definitely see some government assistance, because I think that, as I said, that's probably one of the few areas where you probably do want at least some sort of first-hand observation. But for somebody who wants to become a teacher, for example, I think that if you can go to a state-approved exam room and you can pass all the written courses on paper, then I don't see why somebody, for example, who studied Canadian history on their own free time should somehow be regarded as less than somebody who studied Canadian history in the classroom. They both may know just as much as the other, but under our current system, it's going to be the latter that's going to be given privilege. I say that I think that's very unfair towards those who are more of the self-learning variety, but until certain reforms come along, I don't anticipate that changing, but that's my personal opinion. Question number 27. Given around 70% of Harvard and Yale admissions are from the top 20% of U.S. income earners, don't our high fees ensure preferential treatment for the rich? He said would. He probably meant what. What could be done to make university admissions fairer for all Americans? Well, as I guess some certainly must understand from the previous questions, I believe that people are too dependent on university degrees to improve the workforce. The workforce is not going to be improved by oversaturating the market. The whole purpose of universities back in the old days was as an institute for learning. And to be fair, back then we did not have the internet or other resources that make information more easily accessible. So unless you had a local library that you regularly went to, or you were wealthy enough that you could buy your own books at the bookstore and study on your own free time, then university was regarded as a most practical way of learning. But that's not the case anymore. Just about anything you could possibly ever learn in a classroom can just as easily be learned online. So I guess perhaps the solution is not so much about making universities more available, more accessible towards the lower income demographics, but perhaps, as I said earlier, we need to go back to a time when employers were more open to hiring people based on their skill levels. I think that the best way to do that would be for the government, rather than to invest in tuitions, they invest in business grants or other job openings that would encourage more competition in the market. Eventually, employment would raise a job, and then when the employers find themselves in a scenario where they have more vacant spots than people to hire, they would be forced on their own terms to compete with other employers in not only providing more fair wages, but then they would also have to lower their hiring standards to a more realistic degree. And I think that's going to be a far more long-term effective way of overcoming any other economic situations in my race than university degrees, which are, quite frankly speaking, financially wasteful to begin with. So I have Alex Komarov. He's got 2 questions here. They're both about the current conflict going on in Ukraine. So I'll try to read them off, see what he has to say. Question number 28. What do you think of the reports that some historical monuments of Russian cultural figures of a distant past are getting pulled down in Ukraine by authorities? Well, I know that in recent years, a lot of monuments to Lenin and Stalin have definitely been toppled. Perhaps he's talking about those, but I think he also mentioned in his private messages that the poet Pushkin has also been targeted by modern Ukrainian citizens. As a general rule, I'm not really in favor of pulling monuments down just because figures are popular. It's not because I'm not saying that the people in Ukraine are right to want to look at Lenin Stalin in a positive way, because I understand that the Soviet Union's role in essentially persecuting the Ukrainian population during the 1920s and 1930s, and then later in the 1940s. But the thing is with history is that you don't remember people just because they were people you admired. That's why, as I said earlier, usually people who are regarded as the great are the kinds of people that people from their time period would most certainly have hated. I could not imagine that somebody from the early 13th century who lost their family members to Genghis Khan would think highly of him, and yet in the modern United Kingdom, a country that was never even conquered by the Mongolians, they have statues of the warlord on public display. So, as I said, I think that a lot of people, they take the idea of monuments their own way. If one of the interesting facts about having monuments in different time periods is that the younger people who may otherwise not have ever bothered to read or know about a certain figure will know about them because of a monument. They might go read up a book, and then they might say that this person was either a person they admired or somebody that they despised. It's kind of like how Louis XIV, he's regarded as a fairly controversial ruler in both France and in also the Canadian province of Quebec, because he was regarded as fairly ruthless, and he also lived a fairly lavish lifestyle in Versailles. While in the late 1690s, millions of French people battled with starvation. He and yet we have our busts and other types of memorials dedicated to the former French monarch, and it's not because people in Canada necessarily see him as somebody that they look up to, but just simply because of somebody who was profoundly influential in the creation of early French Canada. And I guess a lot of Russian, pre-Soviet Russian figures were probably very influential over modern Ukraine, like Kiev and Rus. It was founded by a monarch by the name of Vladimir the Great, who started off as a fairly ruthless warlord before his conversion to Christianity. He's, from what I understand, even though most of his empire was stretched into modern Ukraine, he himself apparently would be regarded as more Russian in background. I don't know if statues of his are being targeted, but as I said, if it should be remembered that even though he may not have been a particularly inspiring leader in his early years in power, it's what he later did in terms of influence after converting to Christianity that really counts for something. I just thought I would point that out. So question number 29. I saw a report today where the monument of Russian writer 19th century Pushkin was put down. Okay, I think about that part up already. Is that a reason to worry about? I heard some pro-Ukrainian commentators, including Mark Lenin, expressing concerns about that. Well, as I said in the previous question, a lot of times people, they seem to believe that we should only have monuments to people that we like. What if 20 or 30 years from now, people, their perceptions change and they start taking down monuments of people that our modern society likes? I'm not going to name examples because that would probably drag the video on longer than it needs to, but from one generation to the other, people are going to see historical figures very differently. As I said, Genghis Khan, he's well revered in many modern European societies, even though he most certainly would not have been seen in the same light just a few centuries earlier. But I believe that one of the advantages of keeping figures like him on public display is that people are less likely to forget his impact on history, regardless of whether you not to think he was negative or positive in its aspects. The problem, though, is that right now is that Vladimir Putin, he's concerned about the targeting of statues of Lenin and Stalin, and he claims that this is some sort of Nazi reinstatement coup, and that's what he's been using to justify his invasion. But then the irony, of course, is that if you go to Moscow right now, there's an entire tomb that's dedicated to preserving Lenin's body and keeping him on public display. That, despite the fact that, as I said, according to people who lived under both German and Soviet occupation, the Soviet leaders were at least as bad, if not worse. So why is it that Putin believes he has the right to invade another country on the grounds that they're not critical enough of the Nazi regime, while more or less uplifting some dead dictators to cult-like status is something that shows the double standards that we're experiencing. And of course, as I said, if we went back to just preserving the monuments of people who were notable and not necessarily people who were looked on in a positive manner, then you probably would not have to worry about this this aspect in the first place. So that really wraps up all the questions that we've had for tonight, actually. Just one moment though, I'm going to do something very interesting. I'm going to actually ask a final question. It's going to be the 30th of the evening, and hopefully afterwards it will be a wrap, but just give me one moment just to make sure that the camera is still working. So it seems that everything is working as planned. So my 30th question is going to be this. What do I expect to make out of this channel? Well, as I've explained to my viewers already, I spent many years writing articles and novels. I can express myself far better in written format than in speech. I'm quite certain that I'll be getting some feedback from users who say that they had difficulty understanding what I had to say, and so far as I probably would not be able to blame them because I'm not very experienced at talking directly to people, whether it's in front of a camera or in real life. So what I will try to do is I'll eventually try to translate everything from video into written format so that all the awkward stumbling can be quietly removed, so to speak. But in terms of my content, right now I'm doing a questions and answers page, so needless to say, it was not anywhere near as scripted as I hoped my later videos will become. Some of the topics that I want to get into will be, of course, historically related. Some users have shown that they have an interest in questions related to religion or creative writing, so I'll make sure to get into those as well. But I also want to make video tutorials where I'll be teaching people how to do mental math tricks in their head, such as 4-digit by 4-digit multiplication. I've written articles on that in the past, but I figured that perhaps some people would better appreciate to see this being performed live, and I intend to do that at some point in the near future. And then there's, as I said, I've written quite a few novels. I continue to publish them in written format, but perhaps I will have fun reading them off to my viewers at some point, because it'll be far better scripted. I think that a lot of the awkward stumbling that perhaps took place tonight there might be removed in those kinds of videos. And then I'm going to be making some gameplays, because I do have experience in quite a few games from my earlier youth. I got back into them somewhat recently, and sometimes I had unique strategies or ways of playing that could be of assistance to any users who are struggling in accomplishing some levels. And I've also have quite a bit of experience in cooking vegetarian meals. So if you have a favorite traditional dish that you enjoy, perhaps I'll be making a video where I'll show you how you can make that same dish, but without the animal products included. So, and by the way, if you guys have any other further questions regarding what you want me to provide in the future, by all means, send me written format. Send me a private message in written format, and I'll be certain to get around to it in the future. Thank you, and take care for now.